We've got 20 cards that are commonly misread at Commander Games, cards you might be misreading.
I'm Mia, and I like vanilla more than chocolate.
I'm BZ, and I can't read. We're the Nitpicking Nerds. We make videos every single day, and we're sponsored by Dragon Shield. They actually have the best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves?
If you haven't checked them out, there's an EU or US link in the description. I'm thinking you could go there, buy sleeves for yourself, and support the channel at the same time just from using the link that we have in the description.
We're also sponsored by Moxfield, the best deck building website in the entire internet. There's going to be an ad somewhere in the video. You can't guess where it is. If you did, you lied.
We don't like liars here, but feel free to guess. And also, happy birthday to everyone whose birthday is today. And happy special shout out to CommandFest Orlando from Cool Stuff Inc., where you can save 5% on your order if you could use code
NERDS
at checkout. That's 5 real percent dollars. But we want to tell you about CommandFest Orlando. This is October 20th to the 22nd. This is a big, gigantic event that you can come play Commander with us at.
We're also going to be there with MTG Nerd Girl, Joe Cherries, Covert Go Blue, Voxy, and a whole bunch of other special guests. So come hang out, play a game.
Yes, and they have an exclusive Phoenix playmat that you're looking at right now and going, oh, that's pretty cool. So you better get down there. You can register right now at CommandFestOrlando.com. It's in the description.
Magic's a tough game. There's a lot of rulings and timing restrictions and a lot of weird interactions. So we're going to explain a few cards that we've seen get wrong a lot.
Yeah, we do have seen these either ourselves or from other people just get commonly misread. One of the biggest offenders is Galta and Mavrin. This is 3 green, white for a 12/12 with trample. Whenever you attack, choose one. Create a tapped and attacking XX green dinosaur creature token with trample, where X is the greatest power among other attacking creatures. Or create X/1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is the number of other creatures that attacked. There's just so many words on this, and there's so many different points that I've seen get misread, and I don't even blame people because this is a confusing card. First of all, this triggers whenever you attack, so this does not require Galta and Mavrin, thank you Miso, to attack. You play them, attack with something, and then you're going to get one of the two bonuses. The green attacking XX green dinosaur. It is not equal to the greatest power among creatures. It's the greatest power among other attacking creatures, which means Galta and Mavrin aren't going to give you a 12/12 when they attack. It has to be the next biggest thing. And then the number of vampires you get is always equal to the number of attacks. It's not equal to like the greatest power like the first thing is. There's so much to think about.
We've seen a lot of Selesnya decks use this card to do big stompies or just go wide, and it's really, really good for that. I mean, a 12/12 that makes other bodies, that's absolutely amazing. However, it doesn't trigger on them, and we have seen people try and get the 12/12 dinosaur, and it's just not right.
Next is a card we love here at the Nitpicking Nerds. It's Druid of Purification. It's 3 and a green for a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, starting with you, each player may choose an artifact or enchantment you don't control. Destroy each permanent chosen this way. This has been a tricky one to resolve. I want to say almost every time I've played it, because I think someone at the table is just kind of like has a question about it or something needs clarifying. It's just a confusing card. It does not target. So when the ability that enters the battlefield trigger goes in the stack, they either respond to that or they don't get to respond. Like, I've blown up Commander Spheres. You don't get to sack in response because before the trigger goes off, you don't know what I chose. And then during it going off, there's no point to interact. It's really weird. It's just a tricky card.
We've definitely seen a lot of people try to react to this like it was being targeted. So just keep that in mind. Maybe have a talk with the table prior about what their targets are going to be before you start sacking things, or just kind of figure out what the targets are.
There are no targets.
Targets.
But also, the other tricky thing is that they can't destroy things you control. So if you read this card and you thought it was bad, it doesn't ever hurt you. It's always a 3-for-1, or I guess they can collude to make it a 2 or a 1-for-1. That still seems pretty good to me. Next is Space Marine Devastator. This is 3 and a white for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment, but the part that trips me up is Squad 2. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may pay 2 any number of times. When this creature enters the battlefield, create that many tokens that are copies of it. The thing that I just wasn't intuitive to me at first was you pay Squad, let's say you pay 4 to cast this, and then you pay 8 mana, you pay Squad 4 times. Somebody counterspells this, you don't get anything.
You're out fully of your mana, and I don't know, it's just a really feels bad. Though I think Squad was only released in the Warhammer, so it is a fairly new mechanic.
Yeah, it's on like 7 cards, but do keep in mind, maybe you haven't played against Squad, if somebody plays this gigantic Squad spell and you're like, oh my god, there's another one that gives +1/+1 to all your creatures that has Squad. You can just counter the spell on the stack and they don't get anything.
One of the cards that I really love to talk about is Vicious Shadows. 6 and a red for an enchantment that says, whenever a creature dies, you may have Vicious Shadows deal damage to target player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. And I think there's a few things that people get wrong with this. One of them is that it doesn't matter who owned the creature that died. You can choose any target player and deal damage to them equal to the number of cards in their hand. It also isn't one of those things where it deals damage equal to the cards in your hand. I've seen a lot of people talk about trying to draw a bunch of cards and then dealing like 20 damage when they have no max hand size. So it's a little weird.
This is a card you have to reread no matter how many times you play against. Like, it cares about... So if player B's creature dies, you could deal damage to player C equal to player C's hand, and it's just like, it can be pretty brutal. If you have a sack deck, this is mostly game over when you land this card, but really it is going to be confusing everyone. Someone tried to play a board wipe when you had this card out, and they died because it didn't matter.
It's really, really good with board wipes and like Nekuzar decks, though, in my Ishai and Vile Smasher deck. It just deals out damage really fast. If anyone has more than like a couple cards in hand, that starts to add up.
Yeah, if you are playing against this card, do not wipe the board, because that is not going to help you. The next is, let's say, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. This is a land that taps for colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap it to add a mana of any color equal to the number of devotion you have to that color. So this is more about how lands don't use the stack. You can't respond to someone playing a land. You can respond to a trigger it might cause, but you can't do anything between them announcing a land and putting a land out. That's not gonna work. And you also can't respond to mana abilities, because mana abilities don't use the stack, and they can also get around. They can also be activated, I think, during split second. I think, but the problem that this comes to, Nykthos was a great example, because if you play Nykthos and you try to activate, all right, I'm gonna tap 2 swamps and I'm gonna make 7 black mana because I have 7 devotion. If somebody wants to like respond to that and kill like your 3 pip creature to lower your devotion, that's just not something they can do.
They also can't destroy your land with like Assassin's Trophy as soon as you play it. Like, there's no entering the battlefield trigger for that land itself. So it gets a little dicey, and you have to wait for them to do their next action.
Yeah, and even if there wasn't the battlefield trigger, they could still respond by making mana, which you then couldn't stop. Yeah, there's no way to stop it. So I guess if you have been, I know some people who try, it's just not going to work.
The next one is an alternate win con in so many white decks. Approach of the Second Sun. 6 white for a sorcery that says, if this spell was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach of the Second Sun into its owner's library, 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. I think this one's a little bit confusing because it checks if it was cast. The Approach of the Second Sun, it was cast prior to this game. It didn't have to resolve. So a lot of people might counter the first one. It goes into the graveyard, but if they get it back with like Eternal Witness or something and they cast it again and the second one resolves, they win.
Yes, it is definitely a little tricky that it doesn't matter about resolving. And it also isn't a card that, some people I know think this, that wins the game like when you cast it. It has to resolve for you to win the game the second time around. It doesn't win on cast.
Hold up those counter spells, I mean, for the second one at least.
Get ready. Or you just kill them because you got a few turns to beat them down. How about another card with Second Sun in the name? Sphinx of the Second Sun. This is even more confusing. 6 blue for a 6/6 flyer. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, there is an additional beginning phase after this phase. It's not a lot of words, but it's so confusing. Everybody kind of thinks that this gives you like an extra turn, or they certainly did when it came out. But what happens is let's just start. You play Sphinx of the Second Sun. Then you go to your post-combat main phase, and now it triggers to create a beginning phase after this phase. You take your entire post-combat main phase, then it ends, then you get untap, upkeep, draw, and then your turn is over. So you can't, you drew a sorcery off of that, you can't cast it because you're going to go right to your end phase.
This is really good in decks that like Braids, where you put something down at each upkeep, or if you have creatures that need to tap and have an activated ability because you'll have the mana for it. But unless you're having a lot of instants in your deck, it doesn't work as well. I think that a lot of people think that they gives them an extra main phase because of so many Miso cards that are like, this is an extra combat, and after that there's an additional main. Yeah, this only gives you an untap, upkeep, draw. It's kind of, think of it more like Wilderness Reclamation than Time Walk. That's probably a better way to look at it. But yeah, Sphinx of the Second Sun, kind of just needlessly confusing. The next couple cards, I think, are kind of confusing because Protection is a weird mechanic. It's Teferi's Protection and the One Ring. Teferi's Protection is 2 and a white instant. Until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you gain protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out, and then you exile the spell. The One Ring has so many words. You put burn counters on it, you tap it, you draw cards equal to the burn encounters, you lose life on your upkeep, but the most important one says, when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn.
Yeah, and protection from everything doesn't. It's very similar to indestructible. Like when I first started playing, and I know a lot of people first start playing, they go indestructible. Well, good luck dealing with this. And there's like 87 things that deal with it. Protection from everything is not synonymous with you cannot die. There's still a few things that you're super vulnerable to, even through a Teferi's Protection with no permanents, even through the One Ring protection. The first one is decking. If somebody casts, if you got 20 cards in your deck and someone casts 3 Wheel of Fortunes, you lose. You still lose the game to decking.
There's also poison, as I mentioned earlier, because you can choose to proliferate people, and that isn't a target, so it gets around protection.
Yeah, it really doesn't seem like it, but if you're at 9 poison with a Teferi's Protection after resolved, you still die to proliferate, and you still die to like prologue of Phyresis, because they do not target.
I mean, your life total can't change is a great thing to have stapled onto a card, but, we can all die from other things too.
I don't know if this next one counts as a misread, but because it's got words that aren't on the card, but it's Opposition Agent. It's 2 and a black for a 3/2 flash. You control opponents while they're searching their libraries. While an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find, and then you can play them from exile, and you can spend mana. That's not really the concern here. The only weird thing about this card that you may or may not know is that while you're searching someone else's library as them, you can just look at their hand.
That's kind of crazy, and I know a lot of people, when you play this and you go, all right, give me your hand, it like doesn't feel good, and they'll
where's that line of text?
Instinctively we go, no, but since it is searching, you do have the knowledge of knowing what is in that player's hand.
Yeah, you can have access to like face-up zones, and I think you can look at sideboards too, but that's obviously not a factor in Commander. Just keep that in mind. Your Opposition Agent, maybe you've just got a buff. Maybe it's just 10% better now that you get to see their hand. What is next?
Next is Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow. 1 blue and a black for a 1/3, but she has Commander Ninjutsu, which when you ninjutsu in, it's a blue and a black every single time, no matter how many times you've ninjutsu'd her in. Whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value. So the really dangerous thing about her, as I mentioned earlier, is the fact that there is no commander tax on the ninjutsu ability.
Yeah, and I think people misread ninjutsu a little bit, or I've at least seen, let's say Yuriko is probably the most overkilled card that I've really ever seen in Commander games. People see it and they're like, I don't want that trigger to go off. I got to kill her. It's like, but that's not really going to work with ninjutsu. Ninjutsu, they'll say they got 3 evasive dorks and they're all flying in and they're all unblocked. They ninjutsu one of them out. Here's Yuriko, and then you go, okay, well I have to kill that. So you try to kill it. Then they go, okay, it's dead. Put it back to the command zone. All right, I'll ninjutsu again, because ninjutsu it's not a once per turn thing. It's not like only at specific points. You could do it after damage while you're still in combat. You just have to do it after blockers, and you can do it after first strike damage while damage is happening. Ninjutsu is confusing, but yeah, you're killing Yuriko before she hits when they can just ninjutsu it again. Not a great move.
Yeah, if you see the mana up, definitely never do that. You got to kill her little buddies, everything that's swinging in, and leave her stranded on the field. If you can like elk her or something with an Oko, that's a really good idea, or turn her as like a morph, like face down or something. But if you kill all the little buddies, you're only going to be getting like 1 trigger max.
Yeah, they're not gonna be able to do it as well. Next, I don't really have a specific card for, so let's just say it's Tarmogoyf. This is just characteristic defining abilities, or the star in a creature. What does it mean for a creature to have star? It means, well, in the text box it's going to say its power and toughness are equal to something. But the special thing about stars is that they apply in all zones. So like Imperial Recruiter says, go find a creature with low power. And now if there's 3 types in all graveyards, or let's say there's a bunch of full graveyards and you want to find Lord of Extinction, you can't, because it's a 60/60 while it's in your library. Tarmogoyf is a 3/4 while it's in your library. So I think a lot of semi-intuitive things that you would think would work do not work, because star is not treated as 0.
Yeah, I think we were talking about Tarmogoyf earlier. It's like if you play a lightning bolt and it goes to the graveyard and you have a couple types, does it actually kill it?
Yeah, it might not if that's the first instant. Tarmogoyf's a weird card, but it's the star too. I also want to point out, if this seems weird, it's the same as Changeling. Changeling is on cards, but it affects cards in all zones. So for the same reason you can go find a wizard with wizard cycling off of Changelings, you can not find Lord of Extinction most of the time with like Imperial Recruiter.
This one has to do with replacement effects and damage. We're talking about like Torbrand and City on Fire. Torbrand says, 1 red, red, red for a 2/4 that says if a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent that an opponent controls, it deals that much +2 instead. And City on Fire is 5 red, red, red with it's an enchantment with Convoke, and it says if a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that instead. The person whose item is being effective actually picks the order of which these replacement effects like happen.
Yeah, these are going to be very different depending on which order you do. If I am getting lightning bolted to the face, I could apply the +2 from Torbrand first and then triple it to take 15, or I can triple it first and then add +2 to take 11, which is obviously better for me. So yeah, the person who's being affected, the object controller who's being affected chooses the order, and it's not like you only one of them applies, or like somehow it gets to 15. Like, you're probably going to just choose whatever's best for you. You get to choose the order. There's a lot of weird stuff with replacement effects, and it can devolve into like who's the active player, but the one I see most commonly is like 2 damage replacements.
I mean, every damage point counts, especially if it's a burn deck, but if 2 or more players happen to have a choice of like if their permanents are being affected, it does go to active player then non-active player.
I think I'm gonna throw this out there. I think another example of this is if you cast Nexus of Fate and someone else has a Rest in Peace, there's 2 replacements that are trying to happen, and I think you get to choose and just put Nexus of Fate back in your deck.
I mean, you love Nexus of Fate.
I do.
So you should know that one.
I consider myself an expert, but I think that's how it works. I haven't played that card in a hot minute. But let's go to the next one. It's Blind Obedience plus Gods with Devotion. So Blind Obedience is 1 and a white for an enchantment. It has Extort. No one cares for this purpose. Artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Now, my question that I'm going to answer is, with 4 Devotion, if I cast Heliod and I have 4 Devotion, the original Heliod, he would enter as a creature, right? Would he enter tapped or untapped? What happens is you check how the permanent would exist on the battlefield, but not while it's on the battlefield. So we look at the fact that I have 4 Devotion. Heliod with 4 Devotion is not a creature, so he enters untapped when they have Blind Obedience. Not intuitive at all.
No, a lot of things really aren't. Another version of these like types and whether they come in is like mutate. If you mutate on top of a god, it loses the enchantment and still is a creature, but it keeps the abilities it had prior. So if you lose all of the devotion that you had, it's not a creature anymore, and it's also not enchantment, so it's just typeless.
It's nothing. That I have never heard before. That's super weird.
The next one is talking about tutors. It's Demonic Tutor versus Enlightened Tutor and the Fail to Find rule. Demonic Tutor says you can search your library for any card and put it into your hand. And Enlightened Tutor is search your library for an artifact or enchantment card, reveal it, and then put that card on top. The deal with this is that Demonic Tutor lets any card in your entire library be a target, so you can't fail to find with it. With Enlightened Tutor, though, you have like a certain type you're looking for, so you can fail to find regardless of whether you have artifacts or enchantments still in your library.
Yep, they don't force you to find anything. This usually is going to come up when you're searching on behalf of your opponent, or if you want to get this card out of your hand, if they're going to be searching for you first. It just comes up every once in a while, You can fail to find if it requires a specific characteristic. Usually if it says reveal it, that's usually what that is. Next, we're going to go to Ricksmithy's The Slumbering Isle. He enters the battlefield tapped with 5 slumber counters on him. He's 4 mana, and he's a 12/12, I believe. And as long as he has a slumber counter on him, he's a land. Whenever you cast a spell, you may remove a slumber counter from a Ricksmithy's, and he taps to add green, blue. I've played this card a couple times, and surprisingly, every time I play it, I think people don't realize that it's a May trigger. They go, oh, a Ricksmithy's is a creature. You're going to remove your last slumber counter. And I usually just go, no, I don't want to right now. What I do is I save it for like after a board wipe or something. He just kind of sits around, and then as soon as you cast a spell, you just clock somebody in the face for 12. It's actually been pretty consistent if you play him early. So I like Ricksmithy's a lot, but it is a May. You do not have to remove those.
Yeah, I think the big deal with this is the fact that up until the last one, you are going to be removing them. So people assume that it's like, oh, of course you're going to remove it, and then I'll kill it with my swords or something. No.
No, I need my land until I want to hit you for 12. Who's next?
Next are creatures that cast multiple spells at once, like Diluvian Primordial and the Big Atali. Diluvian Primordial is 5 blue for a 5/5 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, you can cast up to one target instant or sorcery card from from that player's graveyard without paying its cost. If it's cast that way and put into a graveyard, exile it instead. And big boy Atali is 5 red for a 7/7 trample. When it enters the battlefield, each player exiles cards from the top until they exile a non-land, and you can cast any number of spells from them without paying their mana costs. The deal with this is they're all on the stack at the same time, so you can't order them one by one. The deal with these is that they're all on the stack together. You can choose how they're ordered, but they're still all on the stack.
Yeah, if there's 4 creatures with Tali, you can't like cast one of them and then cast a sorcery. You cast one of them, then the next one's on the stack trying to resolve. Like boom. You can cast instants because you're gonna have priority and stuff. But I've seen people try to do some funky things with like counter spells and like targeted removal, or like I have this that I want to play first, and it's like, yeah, but these cards they all have to resolve. Like if Diluvian Primordial exiles a counter spell, I think you can counter your own thing. It needs a target though. You can't like have something else go on the stack. Is Diluvian Primordial plus counterspell basically just never works unless you're flashing it in and responding to something. But these cards just get a little weird. Just know that you got to do them all together. It's not like one now, one later.
Yeah, I've actually seen this recently. I saw a Tali come down and then someone try and flicker it. So the batch that comes down first goes on the stack, and then the other ones go on the stack above it, and those resolve first.
Then you get your second batch, which was the first batch, because that's how the stack works. Yeah, you know what I mean. For this next one, I'm going to read you 4 magic cards. Don't worry, they're all very similar. We're going to do Thassa Deep Dwelling, which is 3 and a blue for an enchantment. Creature 6/5, indestructible. It's got devotion text, doesn't matter. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to one other target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. And it's another ability that doesn't matter, and I'm not going to read it. We also have Cloud Shift, white, instant, exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. And we also have Blur, 2 and a blue for an instant, exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control, draw a card. And as a bonus, a special bonus for you, we have Ephemerate, white, instant, exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, rebound. So the Thassa and Cloud Shift return the flickered card to the battlefield under your control, and Blur and Ephemerate return the flickered card to the battlefield under its owner's control. That's the more common route, but what you can do with the first two and anything that says under your control after you flicker it is like gain control of a creature temporarily, or with something like a Mind Flayer or an Active Treason, then flicker it and you just get to keep it now.
I've definitely seen people try and steal creatures, then flicker it with like Blur or something. It's like, okay, I'll take that back, thank you.
Yeah, a lot of times that's not how it's going to work. Eldrazi Displacer is another one that goes under the owner's control, so you can like take your stuff back and whatnot. But yeah, I really like the little wrinkle that Thassa and Cloud Shift add to like, maybe I will just steal this thing forever. Next, we have 4 rulings that people often confuse, and they're all related to one keyword. I'll let Mia start us off.
It is Trample we're going to be talking about. Mother of Runes and Trample. First off, Mother of Runes is for 1 white, a 1/1. If you tap her, target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. The deal with Trample and protection here is that you have to assign lethal damage to the creature that's blocking, but you can assign the rest that tramples over so the defending player actually takes that damage.
It's really weird because you would think that protection is going to absorb all the damage, but the way you're assigning it, protection doesn't stop you from assigning damage. It like prevents the damage that will be dealt. So if I have a 3/3 coming in and you got a 1/1 that's got protection from creatures and you're blocking, I'm still going to assign 2 to your face, 1 to the creature. Then the 1 damage gets prevented, but you're still taking 2. And I think that goes over a lot of people's heads because Trample apparently is really confusing.
Yeah, protection's a little bit weird because it does say preventing damage, and that's just like really weird with Trample itself.
The problem is Trample. Trample's got so much confusing crap. Like, let's go to City on Fire again because we already read that card. And Trample. We know City of Fire triples damage, but if I attack with a 3/3 Trampler, thank you, Miso, let's say they block with a 1/1. What's going to happen, thank you, Miso, is I'm going to assign 1 damage to the 1/1 and 2 damage to their face. Then City on Fire is going to triple the damage, which means their 1/1 takes 3. That does not triple over. They just takes 3. And then they take 6 to the face. Extremely confusing because you don't double the assigned damage. You double the damage that's actually dealt.
Yeah, you have to wait till it fully gets dealt before you start using those replacement effects.
I almost guarantee you've gotten burned by that one before. If someone, tries to attack you with a 4/4 and they're like, it's going to deal 12 damage and it's got Trample, that's not true.
Another confusing interaction is Oron Frostfang and Trample itself. Oron Frostfang is a 3 green creature that's a 2/6, and it says attacking creatures have Death Touch, and whenever you deal combat damage with one of your creatures, you draw a card. And with Death Touch and Trample, you just have to assign 1 point of damage to the defending creature. That kills it because that counts as lethal damage, and then the rest can just trample over.
Yep, if you have a 10/10 with Trample and Death Touch, and they block with a 10/10, they take 9 damage. Trample only checks if you're assigning lethal damage. Once you do that, you can trample the rest over, and Death Touch is like, oh, hey, anything's lethal. So the two combine very well, and if you have Oron Frostbang plus Trample, you can draw a lot of cards.
The next mechanic was introduced in All Will Be One, and I have a lot of fun with it. It's toxic, and with Trample, you actually get the toxic value assigned even if you deal 1 point of damage of Trample over to the controller.
Yeah, Tyrannix Rex is an example. It has Trample, and it's got Toxic 4. If you block it with a 6/6, you take 1 damage, and then you take all 4 toxic. It doesn't matter how much damage is dealt to you. That probably doesn't come up a lot, so it might be confusing if you see it. But now you know any damage from a toxic creature, you get the full brunt of whatever toxicity they have.
It can be pretty nasty, but the next topic we talk about, you love.
I love MDFCs. I really, really do, because they're a land on the back, and they're some sort of spell on the front. But what happens if you play the spell side like a creature, and then you flicker it? Or you play the land side, and then you flicker it. Well, if you play a creature and it's an MDFC and you flicker it, it just comes back as a creature. That's cool. But what if I flicker Balgud Recovery? I can't put a sorcery on the battlefield, and the game knows that. What happens is it goes to the exile, and then it never comes back, because in exile it's now like back to Balgud, and you can't return Balgud to the battlefield. So the game's like, nope.
This is pretty interesting, considering if you flicker someone's MDFC land and it's a sorcery or instant on the other side, you can just basically strip mine them.
Yeah, but if for some reason you have a land that's an enchantment on the backside, or a land that's a creature, or any permanent, those can return to the battlefield. So that's going to be just fine. This next card, seriously, it's so confusing. I looked everywhere for this, and I might still be getting it wrong, but I'm like 90% sure. If I'm wrong, correct me, and I'll pin the comment that has this right. But Flash of Insight. It is X, 1 blue, instant. Look at the top X cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. That's cool. That's totally normal. But what confuses me is it has flashback. For 1 and a blue, you can, for 1 and a blue, and exile X blue cards from your graveyard. There's an X in the flashback, and there's an X in the mana value. But when you flash it back, you're not paying mana into it. But what happens is, like a creature that this becomes up with is Zafai, who says if you cast a spell with mana value 10, you deal 10 to somebody. If you have 10 blue cards in your graveyard, and you flash back Flash of Insight for 10, or even 8, because you don't need it, because its mana value is 1 and a blue, it adds the 8 to the 1 and a blue, making it 10, and you deal 10 to somebody. It's just like, this is so confusing. I don't even understand it, but I'm like, that's how it works. Almost positive, but what the heck?
Yeah, BZ built Zafai for me, and I thought it was really nasty because of the X instant, but I didn't realize that the flashback also had the mana value that could be up to 10 or more, so I could have just been doming people for 10, and I haven't been.
And I think this is like one of the only cards with like an X value in the flashback or alternate cost and an X value in the mana cost, so it's really weird. I had to look everywhere for this, but for some reason, Flash of Insight, when you flash it back, you're changing the mana value. I know for certain you cannot spell snare it, which counters a 2 mana spell if you exile any number of cards from the flashback. Just wild. Just absolutely wild. What is another video they might consider to be wild?
A video that they might consider to be wild is Overperformers.
Yeah,
they're crazy.
I mean, you got to check out what these cards are doing. I mean, it's unprecedented. And as a fact of the day, Flash of Insight's really weird.